Do complex legal issues hold you back? Let's get energized and bring clarity to your top legal questions. This is Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm.
Hello, I'm your host, Jeana Goosmann, a CEO, lawyer, author, and woman business owner, here to help navigate you through the law, your business, and life as a leader. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing environmental, social, and governance, otherwise known as ESG, and how business leaders can stay at the forefront of these regulations. So, to begin, I think it's important to note that this is a very hot topic in the business world and hearing a lot more of it on the news and with big companies. And it's starting to trickle down into Main Street America. And it's more important for people to know about it and be thinking about it, especially as business leaders, because it's starting to become regulated in various ways that we're going to talk about, as well as have an impact on the value of your business. So ESG was first introduced at the Who Cares Wins conference, which who knew that even existed back in 2005. And that's when they came out with, okay, there are environmental factors that companies need to be concerned about, including their carbon emissions, waste management, water usage, biodiversity, and pollution. And then there's social factors that companies need to be thinking about that relate to how companies treat people, how they treat their employees, customers, their local communities, and society in general. From everything from human rights and diversity and inclusion and equity to the health and safety of the company, non-discrimination, their human capital, their HR policies and management, privacy, data protection, and how these issues are also addressed within their supply chain. And then when it comes to their governance, governing factors relating to how the company itself is run, including if they have directors and the director independence, if they have boards, how diverse their boards are, their board structure, excuse me, and composition of the board, executive compensation, and if they're ever involved in bribery or corruption, and maintaining ethical standards and ethical practices. So, as you can see, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, covers a broad range of topics for business. And we're going to discuss a little bit about the legal landscape when it comes to ESG. And I think as this is picking up more and more, why is it important to companies? And it's really because if you have good practices when it comes to ESG, you're more easily able to attract and retain employees. People want to work for companies that have strong ESG policies and behaviors, and you're able to more easily meet your customer demands as well. Customers are starting to look at these things and decide who they want to do business with and what companies they want to purchase from, as well as suppliers. They're looking at companies and their ESG practices as well. And if you want to have a strong supply chain, that's also really important. Also, investors are becoming more conscious here, and investors are looking at things like ratings of companies when it comes to their ESG practices. And so, if getting ahead of it allows you to be a stronger business, you're going to have a stronger workforce, stronger customer relationships, supply relationships, and overall be a higher value company. So, that's why business leaders really want to be paying attention to it. On the risks of that end of the spectrum is losing customers, employees, and investors, reputational harm, and also potential litigation and enforcement actions. Now, there's no one set of ESG regulations in the law, and that's what can make this a really complicated web when we start to talk about the legal issues related to ESG. And it's really even difficult to define the terminology within ESG and the law. A lot of times those two things, they don't line up. So there's no one overarching set of laws. I can't go to the code book and say, oh, here's the ESG section. No, it's like a web of laws that have developed over time with different jurisdictions attached to them. And we're going to start to kind of unravel some of those so you can get an understanding of what I'm referring to. And by no means is this going to be an exhaustive list of all the laws and regulations that touch on ESG, because quite frankly, that's probably a whole treatise in and of itself and way bigger than one podcast. It probably could be a whole series of podcasts in and of itself. So let's start with the federal side. We talk about federal regulation and federal securities laws and regulations. And I think that's where we start to think of the bigger companies. Companies that are regulated by the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, companies that are regulated by Dodd-Frank. When I look at Wall Street reform and the Consumer Protection Act, that's where we're going to have more disclosure requirements on those companies. And some of those disclosure requirements get put back into their reporting. You can look them up on EDGAR, which is the SEC database, and see what it is that they're putting in their reports and what type of stuff do they have to put in the reports. And that's been a lot of topic of conversation as far as disclosures and what do companies have to disclose along these lines. Now, there's other foreign Corruption Practices Act laws, for example, that's also a federal law. Other federal laws that come into effect and when we're thinking about ESG and social governance, there's forced labor laws. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which goes way back to making sure that goods aren't involved in forced labor. So some of these laws are not new on the books, even though this is a new topic. A lot of these laws have been in place for a long time. It's just they're getting more attention as companies look at their ESG and that social governance. Two, the other statutes that you can think about relate to green marketing. So the Federal Trade Commission is the one that regulates what companies can advertise as far as it relates to saying that they are green and that if they meet these green guidelines. There's some general principles the FTC has outlined for companies to make those claims in order to prevent greenwashing practices, which is a practice where companies make false claims or misleading claims about their environmental impact of their products and services. Also, several states have gotten involved in that too. So while I'm talking at the moment about the federal regulation, just also know that there are state webs of laws and different companies are going to be controlled by different states and where those goods are and where your services are provided. Environmental conservation, that's another one of the laws that comes into effect when we talk about ESG. So the Lacey Act is a U.S. conservation law when we talk about conserving wildlife, fish, and plants, making sure that goods are not involved in anything that's been illegally taken or possessed, transported, or sold. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of federal laws that come into effect. And then when we look at the state regulations, so there are different disclosures in the states that have to be made. California, as you would expect, is one of the more hotly regulated states when it comes to things related to ESG, but they're not the only one. There are compliance requirements with conflicts of mineral disclosures rules. Not all the states have the same rules. So then you can get into a legal issue of, okay, choice of law, which law do you have to go with? And what's maybe the most restrictive or is always a good way to err, but getting some legal analysis as far as what law do you have to comply with in these various areas. Climate disclosure. So I mentioned California. California has enacted different climate-related disclosure bills, bills that require companies to make disclosures about carbon offset and their emissions, as well as if they have any financial risk related to the disclosures with greenhouse gases, for example. Supply chain, California has also been really active there in passing legislation, in particular relating to human trafficking and slavery in their supply chain and making sure that under the California Transparency and Supply Chain Act, that there are any disclosures that particularly affect manufacturers and retailers and those that are doing business in California. State pension funds. That can come up when we're talking about ESG. So different governments are taking positions as it relates to ESG issues and investments within their state pension funds and risk management decisions. Some states have restricted the use of ESG investing for state funds and banned some financial institutions, while others are enacting disclosure requirements for greenhouse gas emissions and other ESG factors as it comes down to what is it that they're investing in and what companies will their state pension be allowed to invest in. Another topic that comes up here, and another one where California has been particularly active, relates to board diversity. So if board of directors are diverse or not. California has actually tried to enact a couple of laws here, and some of them have been deemed unconstitutional. But just know that there's legislative efforts underway in that regard. And that gets me back to the stock exchange. And the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ have also had some government standards when they list companies that they want those companies to comply with. So that can also impact business. And different sustainability initiatives and organizations around the world have other sustainability initiatives that they are trying to enact that can affect different companies, like the UN Global Compact. So the United Nations Global Compact, which is the largest global sustainability initiative, and they invite companies to voluntarily align with their strategies and their goals. There are other things that really are starting to make an impact here too. And I alluded to it earlier in the podcast, but we're talking about ESG ratings. So there are scores or measurements that companies are given by different institutions that remind me a lot of the Moody's ratings, for example, on your credit worthiness of the company. But you can be labeled as a leader or a AAA when it comes to ESG practices, average or a laggard, a B rated or a triple C. And obviously, as a company, you always want the best ratings possible, and that can then impact who's going to invest in your business. And when people are making those different decisions, they're going to be looking at those ratings and those rating boards on whether or not they want to make an investment in your business. So all in all, I think my intent with this podcast today is really just to kind of open everyone's eyes to all the different laws and the regulations and the attempts that are being made around corporate governance, environmental, social, and governance, and making companies healthy and the impact that that's going to have. And while a lot of the laws today do impact big business in America, that does have a way of trickling down into Main Street America as well. And certainly, if you have strong policies and you are compliant with the law, whether it impacts you directly or not, you're ahead of the game. You're going to be a stronger company, a healthier company, and be able to attract and retain top talent as well as investment, customers, and suppliers, which is good business. So being aware is key. And I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning into the podcast today. Go have a great day, everyone. Make it worth it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm. We hope you feel energized and ready to soar past your goals. Become a Flock fan and subscribe to our podcast for weekly episodes. Learn more at goosmannlaw.com.